Hello and welcome to the Sabrina River Folk Podcast with me, Nicola Haasz. Tonight's guest is award-winning legendary forager Steve England of Bristol. Steve is a well-known local celebrity who has made many TV, radio and newspaper appearances. He is passionate about the Severn Estuary landscape and joins us to talk about why it is so special. Welcome to the podcast, Steve.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. So if we could start, Steve, with if you could tell us a little bit about yourself and your history, please.
Yeah, sure. So my name's Steve England and I'm a wildlife conservationist and outdoor educator. And the story really starts for me when I was a child, because I was born next to Stoke Park in Bristol in 1966. And I always remember my dad taking me through the cornfields when Stoke Park was a farm back then. It was part of the National Health Service. And I always remember I was about 4 years old, sat on my dad's shoulders, going through the cornfields, and I just fell in love with it. And the fact that I had access to the countryside from such a young age really sort of was an easy door opener for me, because my dad had a love of the countryside, and my dad took me into Stoke Park every day when I was a little baby, and I just fell in love with it, and I fell in love with the natural world. I didn't know much about it, I just enjoyed it. And as I got older and older, I studied it, and I studied horticulture. And I found myself that I had a natural obsession with plants, and because I was rubbish at school, I was no good in school. You know, put me inside of a classroom, you might as well be sat next to a cat, to be honest with you. So my vocation was outdoors, and my education was through hands-on outdoor learning. And a bit later on in life, I started I had regular jobs in retail and transport. I was a transport manager. I was a national transport manager for the cooperative, all the Homeworld stores back in the, I think it was very early 90s, late 80s. And then they closed all the stores, and I was made redundant. And I got a job with a friend of mine who's a landscape gardener, and as a labourer. And I worked for him for many years doing labouring, and I learned a lot of skills, and I enjoyed it. I really did enjoy it. And in the end, I went on to start my own landscape gardening business called New Look Gardens, which I've still got today. And I went to college, various courses on pruning and horticulture and various things. And I went and studied with the Royal Horticultural Society. I did my level 1. And I found it easy, to be honest with you, my level 1. And then I went back and I did level 2. And you have to remember the Royal Horticultural Society are the world leaders in horticulture. They are the best. And I trained at Bristol Zoo, and where Wild Place is now. And I remember sat in the classroom with all my peers, and I honestly, I think it was, I think it's just in my genetics. I just cannot operate inside of a room, because all my peers were excelling themselves from their modules on whatever, and I felt thick as a plank of wood. I just couldn't get my head around it. So what I did was I wrote every single word down my lecturer was talking on a piece, on a book. And then I went home and I rewrote all my notes, so in a way that I could understand them. And then I went out into the fields and forests and found what we were looking at. For example, you know, how to identify the difference between a fungal pathogen on a leaf or a bacteria, because one's got a lump and one's got a dip. So I went out and found it, and I learned through that way. And so I got to my level 3 in horticulture, and that was probably, without a doubt, the most challenging thing I've ever done in my life. Without a doubt, it pushed my ability to learn to the absolute maximum. You know, we were looking at particles of ions in soil, and we had to learn how to write the mathematical formulae for photosynthesis and stuff like that. It's like, but I enjoyed it. I really did enjoy doing that, and I'm glad I did that. And I did all that, and I failed my exam by half of 1 point, and I was devastated.
Oh, dear.
I was devastated, half of 1 point. So I did it again. It cost me a lot of money, and I sat through the exam again, and I passed. And then when I passed, I thought, wow, okay, so I've got this, and it's probably the only qualification I've got in my life, to be honest with you. And I thought, well, what am I going to do with this now? So I have my landscape gardening business, and then I started working in schools, building gardens in schools and ponds and various things. And then I thought, do you know what? A lot of these schools don't have like an environment club or like a nature club. So I approached some of the school head teachers, and they were very open to it. And Horfield School was one of the first schools that I started an environment club, after school club, and it was free of charge. There was no money involved in it for me. I wasn't being paid, and I did it voluntarily because I was so passionate about it. And then I went around to various communities building community allotments, and then I started doing gardening clubs for local people, and it just snowballed from there. And I thought, wow, this is great. So my teaching just was a natural progression, really, for me.
So, obviously, you're very famous within Bristol and the Southwest as being a educator and somebody who leads walks, in and around Stoke Park and other areas of Bristol, foraging for mushrooms, tree identification, bird walks, bat walks.
It's a lot, isn't it?
All of those things. If you could just explain what foraging actually is for those that haven't maybe foraged before.
Yes, so foraging in a nutshell is being able to go out into the wilds and find yourself something to nibble on and eat safely. Because in the world of foraging, and there's a massive, massive difference between living off the land and foraging. Foraging is just walking around gathering a few little bits and pieces. You know, if you went back to the Mesolithic period, for example, 12,000 years ago, that's living off the land, and it's a very hard life, very hard life. You know, but foraging is something that I've been obsessed with since I was a child. I didn't know much about it. You know, it was a lifelong learning thing for me. And it's not something that you can just wake up in the morning and go, I'm going to be a forager. It doesn't work like that. And there's been so many people that have poisoned themselves over the last year or so with mushrooms in particular. It's very frightening. But foraging is being able to go in a woodland environment, for example, and know what edible or poisonous plants grow in a forest, and not just a broadleaf forest, but a deciduous forest, a pine forest, multiple environments, to be able to go out in the hedgerows and identify what's edible and what's poisonous, the same as in a grassland environment or on an estuary environment, and even coastal as well. So that's what foraging is gathering a few bits and pieces. You know, it's quite a different ball game than living off the land, for sure.
And from conversations that we've had, one thing that is really clear, and from videos and things that I've seen you post on your outdoor learning channels, is that you're really passionate about, in particular, the Severn Estuary environment. Obviously, in particular interest to this podcast. Obviously, you're from Bristol, but the Severn Estuary actually is just down the road from us, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Just as the River Avon flows out into the Severn Estuary. It's very much a landscape that Bristol is very familiar with. And can you tell us why you feel that the Severn Estuary is such an incredible landscape?
Well, can I take you back, first of all, to I was 10 years old in 1976. I remember being at Clevedon in 1976 when we had the heat wave and we had a plague of ladybirds. Now, if any of your listeners are old enough to remember 1976, I'm sure you'll relate to that, because that was a sort of a moment that stuck in my mind in 1976. We were at I think it was the outdoor swimming bit in Clevedon, and we had a massive plague of ladybirds. And I think since then, I've always visited the Severn Estuary. And as I was visiting it, my quest for knowledge continued. And I have a very unusual brain where I do not stop wanting to learn. You know, it's all very well me teaching, but I have a large appetite to learn more. And I thought, well, do you know what? I want to learn as much as I can about the Severn Estuary. So I spent years and years and years studying it. And I met people, spoke to locals, went through all the history archives and so on. And what I found from the Severn Estuary, there is layer upon layer upon layer of history there. And not a lot of people know those layers. They might know one page of a book, but they don't know the chapter, if that makes sense. So I thought, right, do you know what? I'm going to break apart this chapter into pages and show as many people as I can each page. And that's what I did. And that's what I did, and it was absolutely fascinating. It's fascinating, you know, the Severn history. Yeah, and did you know that in terms of the fishing there, the Severn Estuary, because it is the second highest largest tidal range on the planet. It has a rise and fall of about 50 foot, I think. And it is the second best cod fishing location in the country. Did you know that?
No, no.
Yeah, because the cod come in from the Southern Ireland, and they come up the channel and they stay there all winter. And what they're feeding on are the crabs and shrimps and sprats that come up into the Severn Estuary. And I've caught some huge cod from Severn Beach. I've caught some massive cod, and only recently. There's a fishing tackle shop called Real Fun Fishing in Portishead, where the lads there, they sell all the fishing baits and so on. And they had a photograph of a lad who caught an absolute, I think it was a 32-pound cod from Clevedon the other day. Absolutely giant. I know you wouldn't expect that. You would see, you know, you might think you see that in Norway or somewhere like that, but we get them in the Severn Estuary. And the reason why these cod are coming up the Severn Estuary is because it's one of the richest feeding grounds on the planet. Now that is a big comment to make, but that is why we get so many visiting birds there, migratory birds, because of the mudflats. You know, 1 square metre of that mud from the Severn Estuary is probably one of the richest and most biologically diverse ecosystems on the planet.
Wow.
Because of all the invertebrates in there. They've got all the shrimps, all the worms, and all the hog lice, and all the sea slaters, and everything that the animals need to feed on. So that's why you get thousands and thousands of migratory birds. If they come down from the Arctic Circle or up from the Mediterranean regions, they're heading towards Slimbridge, where they get their free food anyway. But they do stop off on the Severn Estuary to have a feed. And I've been there and I've led tours there where we see thousands upon thousands of migratory birds feeding on the mudflats. But sort of like to the, if you're not aware of the ecological value of the mudflats, you wouldn't think nothing of it. You think, look at that, oh, it's just muddy. It's just mud. Well, it is mud, but it's like a cafe. It's like a restaurant to wildlife. And that's why we see so many species of bird life there, and that's why all the cod come up, bass come up through there, eels, salmon. I've seen salmon jumping on the Severn Estuary at Well Wharf. I was fishing there a couple of years ago with a friend of mine, and there was a huge fish that jumped out of the water, and it was a salmon, because the salmon come up through the Severn Estuary. And so when we look at the estuary water, it looks like basically a big cup of coffee because it's all brown. But don't let that fool anybody. You know, if that water was gin clear, and what you would actually see in there would be absolutely mind-blowing, what you would see in the Severn Estuary. It's just that we can't see it, but it is there.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people who aren't familiar with this Severn Estuary, and comments I've had from other people, is that it feels very industrial because it's got the nuclear power stations at Berkeley and Oldbury. You've got the obviously the bridges. You've got Avonmouth with its shipping containers, and it feels very industrial. But I absolutely agree with you. Actually, like you say, under the surface, it is teeming with wildlife, from fish to birds to all the, as you say, the invertebrates, but also the, you know, the flora and fauna as well. So can you give us any tips about foraging on the Severn Estuary?
Yeah, can I just go back a couple of pages to the industrial thing? Because I know it's very, it's a lot in people's minds. If you look at this chapter of pages that I was talking about, so the industrial side of it is one page of the chapter. The reason why it's so industrial there is because it's tidal and it's easy to access, which in commercial terms makes sense, because on the other side of by Goldcliff, there are Roman pills where Cologne, there's a Roman settlement there. So the Romans were utilizing the tide for trade 2,000 years ago. You know, the pills have silted up now, but you can still see remnants of them. So there's always, on any estuary system, you will have industry of one description or another, and the effects of that is another subject. With that, we know, another conversation for sure. It does have an impact on lots of things, but estuaries have been used since time immemorial for trade and industry, you know. But in terms of the foraging there, it's probably one of the most diverse ecosystems that you can get for foraging. The reason being is because you have the aquatic foods, like all the fish. You've got salmon, bass, plaice, all the flatfish, conger eels, cod, and you name it, it goes on. And then you have the intertidal zone, so which is the bit between low tide and high tide, because 50% of the time that's underwater, and 50% of the time it's not. So a lot of plants and wildlife have to adapt to that intertidal zone, and you get plants like sea purslane, for example, and marsh samphire, which can cope with both of those environments. And that is a really good place to forage. But when you're foraging for marsh samphire is an amazing salt marsh plant, and it grows in the intertidal zone. But you have to be very careful when you collect it, because you know, you stand in that mud, you're going to go up to your waist, and then you're in quicksand, and you're not going to get out. So you have to be careful where you forage. But the marsh samphire is world famous because they do sort of up on the upper reaches of the Severn. They graze their sheep on some of the salt marshes there. So they've got salt marsh lamb because of the, you know, the nutritional benefits of all the plants there. And you've got sea purslane there. You've got rock samphire there, which again is another nice edible. And you've got sea beet, which is the ancestor of all modern day beetroot, and that's an evergreen. So there's always something to forage on an estuary. And then you've got all the hedgerows along them as well, and all the grass banks, and you've got loads and loads of, down at Sand Bay, there's loads and loads of wild, crikey, what's it called? Radish, sea radish. Loads of sea radish grows, and also quite surprisingly, they've got some plants down there that I've only ever seen on the south coast as well. Some of the little orange berries. I can't remember what they're called now. It'll come back to me in a minute. But there's a whole variety of plant life that will only grow on an estuary environment. You won't find it in a woodland, and you won't find it in a grassland. It's only on the estuary environment. So estuary foraging is a good thing to do. But one of the things that interests me, and I see a lot of foragers on social media that forage the Severn Estuary, none of them, not one of them, ever incorporates or mention fish. It's always foraging off the land for vegetation and whatever. And I'm thinking, well, that's not right, because you're missing out a whole section of the food chain there, which is interesting. So when I lead my courses there, I make sure that I bring some cod with me from the Severn Estuary, so we can have the whole off the land water meal, so to speak, and that gets very well received, you know, because you're eating Severn Estuary cod on the Severn Estuary.
And what time of what part of the year, what season of the year would you be able to fish for cod? Is it all year round?
You can do, but they predominantly come up in autumn, and they stay over with. They start coming up round about September, October, and they stay right up until about March, and then they go back out into the deep sea. But then you've got your summer species that'll come in, like your bass, your flatfish, conger, and all sorts. And you get a lot of fish called sole there as well, some really big ones as well. Some really big. And there's an organisation called the Black Rock Lave Net Fisheries over in by Goldcliff, Martin Morgan, and these guys are traditional fisheries. You know, they do use rod and line on their boats, but their traditional method of fishing is to stand in the estuary, and to do that you have to have such intimate knowledge of that area. If not, you're going to get swept away. So they'll stand in the estuary, in the gullies, in the shallows, on various tidal patterns, and they'll stand there with their lave nets, and they'll catch salmon and other fish, which is really interesting, because I had the opportunity to go over to Goldcliff about 2-3 years ago now, to meet with Martin Morgan who kindly took me on my friend Harry and I on a tour. We had a super low spring tide. So we put our waders on and our sticks, and Martin took us out about a mile offshore into the middle of the Severn Estuary. And I must be honest, I was quite worried about it because, you know, I'm not an estuary boy. I'm more of a woodland warrior, you know. So this was Martin's territory, not mine. So we were following in Martin, and Martin took us out about a mile. And what was fascinating for me was the archaeology there and the human history that very few people know about. And we went out to the peat ledges, where 12,000 years ago in the Mesolithic period, you know, you could walk from Britain to Europe, Doggerland. And we went out onto the peat ledges, and the band of peat was probably about a foot thick, which was vegetation at one point and trees. And in the estuary there were a lot of oak trees led down, all bog oak, which were all they've been led there for best part of 12,000 years, and I sat on them. My mind was going crazy to think that I was actually stood on the same piece of land that our Mesolithic hunter-gatherer ancestors did 12,000 years ago, hunting red deer, wild boar, aurochs, you name it, and they did it. And within the band of the peats, there was all the vegetation still from that period in time. And I took a piece home with me, and I dried it out, and I pulled it to pieces, and I looked under hand lenses and microscopes, and I had all the leaves still from the Mesolithic rushes that were 12,000 years old. And inside of there were hazelnuts to prove that there were hazel trees there. I had acorn fragments, and I had oak tree branches as well. It was just off the scale exciting for me. It was just like, I was like a child in a sweet shop. That to me was like giving me a bag of sweets. You know, don't give me sweets, give me a lump of peat from the Mesolithic period and let me analyze it and just leave me alone. So I sat there for days on end, and I was so obsessed by it. And there was a really good, I went to a talk going back a few years ago, and I think Dr. Martin Bell from Reading University did a very thorough archaeological survey of the Severn Estuary, and that is still available on YouTube. And that is fascinating because they found children's footprints in the blue clays that were 12,000 years ago, and they've got still in the clay there was some bird prints of the cranes, the common crane, and they've even found the remains of the fishing baskets made from willow that are still in the mud. And also, so all the human archaeology is still there. But one of the challenges is because it's such a fast tidal range, the Severn Estuary seabed, if I could word it like that, or the estuary floor, is always in a state of change because of the tides and so on. So a lot of the archaeology doesn't last too long there. It gets washed away in time. But going back, last year, a friend of mine, Shay Rudge, who's an archaeologist, he was doing some work down near Clevedon, and one of the sandbars was washed away from a storm, and it exposed a gravel track that nobody knew existed going into the Severn Estuary. So they walked it, and they found loads of flint arrowheads from the hunter-gatherer period that were still there, and they've been buried for umpteen thousands of years. So that's one of the things that excites me about the Severn Estuary, is that you've got your modern day history, but you've also got your prehistory as well. And a lot of it we don't see because of the sand dunes, because of the tides, colour of the water, and so on and so on, but it's still there. And I think for anybody that would go and see something like that is certainly a once in a lifetime experience. But certainly don't go there on your own, you know, because it will, you know, get you swept away.
It is very dangerous. Yeah. And if you grow up anywhere near the River Severn, like myself, the first thing you're taught is don't go near the river. You know, and you kind of grow up with a healthy fear of it. especially being in the tidal from the area that I'm from, around Frampton-on-Severn, you grow up with this healthy fear of it because of how dangerous it can be and how unpredictable the tides can be. But of course, all my uncles were and still are actually alvarers as well.
Right.
But I never developed a taste for alvarers.
Yeah, that was gone back. I remember when I was a child, I can remember watching TV programs about elvers on the Severn when I was a little boy. I remember a program by a man called Jack Hargreaves, and the program was called Out of Town, and it was about Jack Hargreaves. He used to present from his garden shed the country way of life, whether it be charcoal making in the Forest of Dean or lumberjacking or basketry or fishing or so on. And I always remember watching one program with him about elvering on the Severn Estuary and what a lucrative business it once was. Maybe not so much now, but back in the day it would have been. And I think one of the biggest challenges now that the Severn Estuary faces is pollution.
Yeah.
Without a doubt, the pollution. That's the biggest problem so far up to date on the Severn Estuary, and that's a lot of it is stemming from the chicken farming on the River Wye. You know, all the phosphates coming into the river and so on. Because I do watch Martin Morgan's videos that they post on their Facebook page, and it's quite concerning actually. You know, when he's going up the River Wye on their kayaks, and they've counted, I think, 11 dead salmon in the water because of pollution, and yet the organisation Black Rock Lavenet Fisheries have been shut down pretty much by Natural Resources Wales because allegedly they were having too much of an impact on the salmon stocks. Well, that cannot be the case. That's not the case because a seal would take more fish out of the estuary than any of these guys would. So I think there's an ulterior motive somewhere. You know, I don't know what it is, but I think that's the biggest fear is the pollution that's being pumped into the River Wye, and it's ending up in the Severn Estuary, and it'll have an impact on everything thereafter. That's the biggest problem.
Yeah, and of course the Severn is like a mother river. She has so many rivers and streams and pills and everything that runs into her. So she gets, you know, everything that's being polluted, you know, flows into the River Severn as well. And I think for me, I absolutely agree. That's one of the saddest things for me is that with the loss of the sacredness of our waters, it then opens up to being mistreated and polluted, and all of those things. And it's such a shame because as you're illustrating, the Severn Estuary is so vibrant with life, and so with so much human heritage there as well, that this should be an environment that's kept pristine.
It's a triple SI site, a site of special scientific interest, which does and has security, allegedly. I mean, I'll give you an example. Ost Cliffs, underneath the first Severn crossing, the geology of the Severn Estuary is off the scale because it's got multiple layers of geology there, and the oldest dates back about 360 million years, which is in the Carboniferous period. It's all Carboniferous limestone, which was basically mud at the bottom of an ancient sea. And if you go up to Ost Cliffs and have a look, and you'll see all the different colours in the rock face there. And the first 3/4 of that is red, and that is Triassic sandstones when it was a desert. About 250 million years ago, the whole area was a desert. And the reason why there's so many fossils there, because that desert had lots of lagoons in them. And there was a massive tidal wave, a huge tidal wave, that killed a lot of the marine reptiles and all sorts of creatures, and they were washed into the lagoons 250 million years ago. And all their skeletons were deposited on the bottom of this massive lagoon, which was miles upon miles wide. So there were hundreds and hundreds of thousands of all these, I won't use the word dinosaur because they're not dinosaurs, but marine reptiles were deposited on the lagoon beds. And then as the lagoons dried out, and they dried out very fast, and we can tell you that by all the seams of calcite in the rocks and gypsum, all the white crystal, which is gypsum. And that's only formed when they dry out very quick. And then you've got other layers of Jurassic clays on top of that, on top of that, on top of that. And that's why it's one of the best fossil hunting sites in the UK. And there, in terms of diversity of what you can find there. But that has triple SI status there. But what concerns me as well is the fact that I've seen people there taking trolley loads of rock away with them, which are not permitted to do. So it's all very well having a triple SI status, but who's enforcing it? That's the thing. You know, you need it, if you're going to put something like that in place, then you have to police it. And it's not being policed. That's the challenge. And they got the same problem in Pembrokeshire as well, on Saundersfoot, where you've got restaurateurs going out onto the cockle beds with machinery, and they're taking up every single cockle there is with a machine, putting them on the back of lorries and then taking them away, which is illegal. But then again, who's policing that? Nobody, which concerns me. You know, not everybody has ethics. Not everybody.
And so even with the, like you say, this world-renowned geology that we have on the Severn Estuary as well, again, these things need to be highlighted and really celebrated.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, rather than kind of be damaged and polluted.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
So, on a good day for you out foraging on the Severn Estuary, you're on a spring day.
Yeah.
What would be a great day foraging that you would find? Would you have a cook up on the side of the river there?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So let's take, for example, May. May's a good time of year.
Yeah.
So May is the peak time of year for marsh samphire.
Yeah.
Marsh samphire. So I go to certain occasions on the estuary and I collect some marsh samphire. And then you've got the evergreens that grows all along there, the sea beet, which is an evergreen. And that's a really nice, that's the equivalent of your spinach there. And then you've got all your sea radish pods. And you've got sea purslane as well. And if you want to fish, you can catch fish. You know, I've caught cod there before, and bass and so on. But in terms of vegetation, there's plenty to do, because you've got your hedgerows as well with all the fruits, nuts and berries. But in May, you've got edible tree leaves there. You've got wild onions. You have wild parsley. But the thing is about foraging on the Severn, you've got to be careful because there are killer plants that grow along there as well. The hemlocks. There are two of them. You've got your poison hemlock, which looks very similar to the edible cow parsley. So you have to know how to separate the two. And you've got the hemlock water dropwort, which grows there as well. Both of those plants, if eaten, will kill you. There's no antidote. There's no way back. So you have to really make sure you know what you're doing before you do it. If not, go on a course or stick to some onions. But yeah, there's always something. But the great thing about the estuary in the spring is, you know, it's in its peak for vegetation and intertidal plants like the marsh samphire, sea beet. You've got the lovely, down by Portishead, there are hundreds and hundreds of wild radish, sea radish pods, and the leaves are edible. And you've got the pods as well, and they are very succulent in May, but by July, a lot of it goes woody and inedible. So the marsh samphire it has a woody core to it. So by July, you've missed the boat there. And the same with the sea radish, with the pods, they've got a wooden seed inside, so they become inedible. But there's always something to eat. Even in the depths of winter, you can still go and forage some along the estuary. Sea purslane's an evergreen. Sea beet is an evergreen. This time of year, you can still get your wild parsleys. So there's always something there. The only thing I wouldn't touch, I've got to be honest, is anything that's like a bivalve, like a shell, because they're filter feeders. Like, I've often wondered about, have people ever knocked the limpets off the rocks and eaten them? I wouldn't, because they're grazers, but they're grazing on the algae on the rocks which they're eating. But the problem is with all the effluent and everything going down through the Severn, it's not something I probably want to do, to be honest with you. So I'd leave the shellfish out of the equation for food. Yeah, without a doubt, just in case. And I have seen oysters, actually. I've seen oysters on the sides of the Severn Bridge concrete structures, all stuck to the sides. Loads of oysters, big ones. But again, they're filter feeders. I wouldn't eat them because they'll be absorbing any toxins that are in the water.
Wow.
It's things like that you have to really sort of be aware of, like the overall environmental situation, pollution potentials, killer plants potentials, any killer lookalikes, any poisonous lookalikes. So common sorrel is a grassland species and is an evergreen, so you can find that in spring, summer, autumn and winter. And but again, you have to be careful because there is a toxic lookalike called the arum lily, lords and ladies. So if you can work out how to separate the two, you're fine. So you can always find something to eat. And that's exactly the reason why hunter-gatherers during the Mesolithic period were on the estuary, because the abundance of food availability to them all year round. But hunter-gatherers, they were nomads. They never stayed in one place too long. During the summer months, they would be on coastal regions on the estuary. But during the depths of winter, they would move inland. They would have to, or they would starve. They would have to. So they were nomadic, yeah. And this is one of the things I love about the Severn Estuary. You know, Dr. Martin Bell, when they were doing their archaeological surveys, found evidence of all the campsites on the Severn, in the middle of the Severn. And I find that absolutely fascinating. When people are driving over either the Prince's Bridge or the first Severn crossing, and you're looking out, all you see is a bit of water, like coffee coloured, but what lies beneath is something else. You know, 15,000 years plus of human history that we don't even know about. You know, I get the point about the industry. When people look at Avonmouth or Albury Power Station, you know, that's one page of a chapter. You know, it's the other pages beneath it that we're not aware of that's taken place, which fascinates me. And one of the funny things is when I go to Wales and I drive over either of the bridges and I've got one of my friends in my car, they're always shouting at me, "Stop looking out the window. You're going to crash. Keep your eyes on the road." I said, "I know, but did you know that 12,000 years ago, if you looked out across there, you'll be looking at a forest and a meander." "Yes, we know, Steve. You've told us before." "Keep your eyes on the road. I don't want to die." "Yeah, I know, but it's fascinating, isn't it?" So a pre-warning for you, Nick. If you ever get in a car with me, okay, and we go over the Severn Estuary, you know what to expect, okay?
I often think about those people that had to do the crossing on the ferry. You know,
Severn Princess.
yeah, and
Yeah.
you know, I've heard stories of people that basically, when faced with the option of going across on the ferry, decided that they didn't want to do it and actually ended up doing the journey up to Gloucester and back round again. Because I think even today I'd be slightly nervous going across on a boat. But to think that people have been making that crossing for thousands of years.
Yeah, absolutely.
Long before we had modern technology as well.
Yeah.
You know, maybe in the past on just a raft or something is quite quite amazing. So, you know, going over the bridge, we take it for granted, really, that we are able to cross this vast estuary. But yeah, I think lots of people have memories of going over on the ferry and feeling a little bit nervous.
I believe that the Bob Dylan, one of his albums, he was photographed on on the ferry, on the slipway there.
Yeah.
Because I've often walked through this. I think they've still got the turnstile there, haven't they? The metal turnstile, and the only remnants of the ferry bridge are the uprights of the ramps, but I've seen lots and lots of photographs of it, the crossing. But yeah, so the pilots who had to do that they've had to have known the tides, they would have to have known the underlying geology and all sorts, because if you get something like that wrong, you're gone. Martin Morgan, when I met with Martin, I filmed a series of 3 videos of him, and on one of the videos he was telling us that during the Second World War, when the American soldiers were about, some locals stole a rowing boat, and they rowed out onto one of the little islands in the Severn Estuary on low tide, and they went off doing whatever they did. And when they came back, the boat had gone, and all 4 of them were drowned, and their bodies were never found. It was during the Second World War. Yeah, and that's how dangerous it is. Yeah. And I've seen Martin's videos of when he's out in the Severn Estuary doing a talk on the dangers of the estuary and the tide. Honestly, it comes in at running speed, running speed.
It does. It's like quicksilver.
And I think a lot of people underestimate how dangerous it can be out there, without a doubt.
Yeah.
Without a doubt. And I've been out, I've been out in a boat fishing off of Western Supermare a few years ago. My friend took me out on his little boat, and I was so surprised how big the waves are. I thought, well, Western Supermare is not going to be too bad because it's not going to be like the sea because I'm on an estuary. I was wrong. Some of the waves were 2-3 foot tall, and I was seasick in an estuary. And my face was as green as grass. And I thought, no, I think I lasted about 3 hours. And I said, I need to go in. I said, I can't. I said, I'm getting, no.
Did you catch anything?
Yeah, we did actually. I've got a photograph of me with about a 5 foot long conger eel that I caught.
Wow.
Oh, it was the biggest thing. And that, again, some of the fish that go through the estuary are massive. And I'll share that picture with you, and you can show it on your page. I've got a massive conger eel.
Yeah.
But also, you know, some of the invertebrates that you get in there are amazing because you've got you've got all the crab life as well, all the species of crab, and that's exactly the reason why the cod come in from the Irish Sea for the crabs and all the shrimp. And you've got a shrimp fishing industry down by Breen, I believe. Where you've got traditional shrimp fishery where they put nets up to catch the shrimp, and there's a very busy place. Without a doubt, yeah. I always wanted to go back in time. If I could have a magic wand, I would want to go back to 3 periods in time on the Severn Estuary. The first one would be to be in the Triassic period, 250 million years ago, to see what it looked like as a desert. As a desert. And then I would want to go to the Mesolithic period, 12,000 years ago, to see and stand in the Severn Estuary to share the experience with these Mesolithic hunter-gatherers, what they were looking at. And some of the wildlife, like the wild boar, for example, and the oryx, which is a giant cow, which is long extinct. And the lads at the Black Rock Lave Net Fisheries have found massive oryx horns in the sediments. And then I would like to go to so I've got the Roman period. I want to see the Roman period, how they utilised all the pills for trade and so on, and what it looked like 2,000 years ago. And maybe one more to go into the future.
Yeah.
Right, let's go into the future. 1 million years. What will we see? Will there be a Severn Estuary? We don't know, do we?
Well, it's an environment that's constantly under threat.
Yeah.
It's an environment that, although it's got the SSSI status, it doesn't feel like it's a safe environment. And I, like many other people, hope that in the future that the environment is more pristine and it goes back to a more natural state, that the fish are thriving, that all of the vegetation and everything is thriving as well, because it is a really special, unique, as you say, biodiverse environment. The tide, the Severn Bore, all of those things. It is incredibly precious, unique environment, and it's something that we really need to protect.
Yeah, absolutely, definitely, without a doubt. And I've seen lots and lots of photographs, and I'm not quite old enough to remember the Lido at Severn Beach. I've seen lots and lots of photographs. And even go back to the 1940s, 1950s, how popular as a holiday destination Severn Beach was.
Yeah.
But it was, people would come from all around the country to stay at Severn Beach. And that, it's just like, because we may take it for granted because we live local to it.
Yeah.
And, but that must be, like, for somebody who lived in Birmingham or inner city part of the country, where they've never had access to a seaside.
Yeah.
And they go to the Severn Estuary. So for them, that must have been like going to Weymouth or Cornwall for us. But I find that really interesting. And Sand Bay is the same.
Yeah.
And Sand Bay, all along the Severn Estuary, was a very popular holiday destination.
And I can see why, because even going there today, I feel instantly relaxed. You
Yeah,
know, it's lots of fresh air.
yeah,
It's a very changing environment seasonally, and even through the day, you can get so many different moods through the day with the weather, can't you? One
yeah,
minute it'll be really beautiful and clear.
yeah.
Next minute it'll be you'll see rain coming in off the river, and there's a storm blowing. I've been there in all kinds of conditions, and it's an interesting environment. Yeah, definitely.
I often go there with my friend Harry Phillips, who Harry and I have travelled the country since the 1970s, since we were children. We grew up next to each other, and we grew up in a period of time where we had no money, no technology, absolutely nothing. And we would travel the country on push bikes, and I always remember riding our push bikes. I had a push bike, like, you remember that Hovis bread commercial, that kiddie riding up that steep hill? Well, I had one of those bikes, and Harry had a rally chopper. And I always remember Harry and I riding to Severn Beach in the 1970s when we were kids. The reason why we went there was to go bird watching, because we were obsessed by bird watching back when we were little kids. So we had our AA book of birds with us, and we would go bird watching, and we get some and do you know, one of the rarest species of birds that I've seen on the Severn Estuary is a spoonbill.
Oh, right.
Yeah, I used to lead a series of walks for South Gloucestershire Council called Forgotten Landscapes on the Severn Estuary. So I led a lot of walks for them, and I was doing a walk up by Oldbury Power Station, and we were walking along the estuary there, and there was this big white bird out in the mudflats, and I thought, that's too large to be an egret. So I put my binoculars on it. I went, he's waving his head side to side, and I thought, there's only one bird that's going to do that. And we zoomed in. I was like, what? You've got to be kidding me. It was a white spoonbill.
Wow.
From Africa.
Yeah.
It's like, wow. But that demonstrates the value of the mudflats to wildlife, not just locally, but internationally as well. International.
I think you're so right. The site, the Severn Estuary, is important nationally, but also internationally.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
International. It's an international feeding station for wildlife, without a doubt, you know. And I watched a programme on the TV a few years ago about the Severn Estuary, and I think it was Avon Wildlife Trust or somebody did a programme on it, and they dug up a bucket full of the mud from the estuary, and they analysed it, and there was something like 200 different species of invertebrate in one bucket of mud. So imagine times that by the millions of tons of mud that you see there. And that's why there's so much wildlife and so much fish there. And like I said earlier, a lot of people don't sort of acknowledge it because they don't appreciate it, because you can't see it. Because the Severn Estuary is basically like a big cup of coffee because of all the sediments in there. But don't let that fool you.
No.
And one interesting fact I learned as well from Martin Morgan was I was leading tours underneath the Prince's Bridge a few years ago, and we were finding loads and loads of fossils from the Carboniferous period, which were 350 million-year-old tree fossils, and there were loads of them. And it threw me, and it was throwing me. I thought, right, hang on, this just doesn't fit in. Something's not right, because the Carboniferous layer is like 40 foot underground. So where are these fossils coming from? They're not coming from off cliffs, because that's Triassic and Jurassic. So, and then I spoke to Martin Morgan at Black Rock, and he said, yeah, what happened was when they dug the Severn Tunnel, they went through the coal seams and the Carboniferous layers of rock, and all the rocks that they dug from that, they spread out along the beaches by the Severn bridges, which makes perfect sense now. Right, okay, so that's how they got there as well. This is, honestly, it makes my mind spin like a spinning top.
Yeah, mine too.
and also, one of the great things as well, when I take groups here, when we're looking for fossils and things of interest underneath the Prince's Bridge in the gravel, you know, in the safe areas, there are lots and lots of fragments of ships and big iron bolts and parts of shipwrecks and all sorts of sea glass that's been washed up. So it's just fascinating. Honestly, I could stay there all day with a bucket just looking. packed lunch or some wild foods, just looking, no agenda.
Yeah.
You're like, leave me alone. Just let me explore and let me play.
And you just never know what you're going to see.
That's the attraction, isn't
It's
it?
the excitement of that environment. I go down regularly, with camera, looking at birds and things as well. And you just never know what you're going to see on any given day down there. It changes all the time.
Yeah.
It's so fascinating.
It is, isn't it?
So, yeah, amazing. So it's very infectious, your love of the Severn Estuary, and I hope that we're giving people inspiration to go and explore it themselves in a very safe way. But if people want to find out more about your courses, things that you're doing, how would people be able to find you online and things like that?
So they can join my Steve England Outdoor Learning Facebook page, where I post lots of videos and various events, or you can go on to my website. Just Google Steve England Bristol and it will come up, or Eventbrite Steve England Outdoor Learning. But I do have a YouTube channel as well. Again, everything is just Steve England Outdoor Learning.
Yeah.
And on YouTube, I've got lots of videos. But on my YouTube channel, I have posted those 3 videos with Martin Morgan on the Severn. So please watch them, series 1, 2, and 3. They're fascinating. Fascinating.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. Thank you so much, Steve. We could talk for hours.
Or we could talk for days.
Yeah, it's so exciting. I'm also feeling a little bit hungry now after talking about.
Do you know what? Can I just add one more thing before we close? When I lead walks there, I lead a lot of walks for an organisation called the Clifton Downs Residents, and it's funded by one of the rail companies promoting more sustainable transport. So we jump on a train at Clifton Railway Station. We go to Severn Beach.
Wow.
We get off, and then I lead a 3-hour tour. And I always take with me, I make a picture, one of the salmon nets that used to be in the Severn Estuary. So I go to the forest and I make one and I take it with me to show people what the sticks that are poking out of the mud were, because all they see now is sticks, but they didn't know they were picture ranks for all the baskets for the salmon. So I make one and take one with me, and then I show them all the photographs of the salmon fishing heritage there, and they went, well, we just did not know this existed. And so that's the whole point of this walk. And they always come away, and I've been fortunate enough to work with hundreds of people on the Severn Estuary. Every one of them has come away saying exactly the same thing. It's like, I will never look at this place again like I did before, because we didn't know.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that gives me a sense of satisfaction that I've done I don't know if I could call it a job. I don't know if that's the right word to use, job, but I don't know, I just feel I was born to do it.
I think you were as well. Well, thank you very much for coming
Nick.
on the podcast.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Many thanks to Steve England for joining us this evening. To find out more, please look online for Steve England Outdoor Learning website and YouTube channel.